All right, let us go ahead and begin. Welcome to this month's installment of Creation Justice webinars. I am Brooks Berndt, the Environmental Justice Minister for the United Church of Christ. As always, I am joined by the Reverend Michael Malcom of the People's Justice Council and Alabama Interfaith Power and Light. Michael, you're taking this webinar very seriously today. It's a webinar about compelling Congress to act, and today you are literally going to Washington, D.C. So I salute you for taking that so much to heart there. We're talking about prophets, so I'm just going to ask that you not pull an Isaiah while you're in Washington, D.C. If those of you might remember, Isaiah walked around naked and barefoot for 3 years to make a political statement. So just don't get the messaging confused, and we will trust you. You do the right job in DC while you're there. So before we jump into introducing our esteemed panelists for today, Michael, can you give us a theological framing for our conversation? Give us the naked theological truth, if you will.
Yeah, Brooks, I certainly will. Listen, when I thought about today's conversation and I thought about where we are theologically with today's conversation, I have to ask the question, who will speak for us? In other words, who will stand up and who will speak truth in power? I was in a meeting, and I was actually doing a presentation with Reverend Dr. Gerald Durley. I sat on a panel with him. And during this meeting, I began to talk about how the administration, that the current administration, was rolling back regulation. And he stopped me in the middle of that, Brooks, and he said to me, he said, "No, you're saying it wrong. The term is not regulations. They're rolling back protection," which then spoke to me as the role of the prophet, the role of the shepherd, the role of the watcher. We are to protect the people and planet. And in doing so, we must be prophetic. There's another something that was said to me by another dear mentor of mine, Nathaniel Smith. He said, demonstration without legislation only leads to frustration. I say that all the time because that's a mantra by which I live. And when you look at that in the conversation that we're having today, this is exactly what we're doing. We're talking about the role of the prophet and how the prophet is to go and speak truth and power in political halls. Unfortunately, we have been taken away from or we've forgotten about the role of the prophet in Scripture and how the role of the prophet spoke truth and power in governmental halls, understood policy that protected people and planet, advocated for policies that protect people and planet. And I think that's what we're here to do today. We're here to reimagine ministry from the role of the prophet, recenter ministry and ministry that protects people and planet. I thank the guests for being here, and I look forward to what they have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for setting up this fabulous panel that we have with us. They're going to help us to not feel frustrated in the next year. And so thank you for that. I'm now going to introduce our panelists in the order in which they'll be speaking. First up, we will have Todd Fernandez. Todd Fernandez is the founder and executive director for Climate Crisis Policy. He has served as general counsel and legislative director for the Massachusetts Office of Economic Affairs and the governor of Massachusetts Brownfield's ombudsman. He has a master's of law and human rights and democracy from the University of Pretoria, South Africa. In 2018, he launched Climate Action Mondays, demanding congressional climate legislation with the Sunrise Movement, Food and Water Action, Climate Hawks Votes, and 350 NYC. He's also led efforts for the Massachusetts Brownfield Revitalization Act, the LGBT Equality Act, the Climate Emergency Media Standards, and the Extinction Rebellion's New York Times action. Following Mr. Fernandez, we will have Shantha Alonso, who has served as the Executive Director of Creation Justice Ministries since 2015. In her time as director, she has prioritized racial equity as a driving force for protecting, restoring, and more rightly sharing God's creation. Her writing has appeared in publications such as The Hill, Sojourners, and Pathos. She has also been interviewed by NPR, Religious News Service, and various podcasts. Shantha has arranged numerous stakeholder meetings between people of faith and policymakers. She has been listed in the GRIST list of 50 fixers and is the recipient of the 2020 National Council of Churches Excellence in Ecumenical Leadership Award. And then finally, we have Rabbi Daniel Swartz, who became the executive director of the Coalition on the Environment and Jewish Life in January of 2018. He has additionally led the Congregation of Temple Hesed in Scranton, Pennsylvania, as their spiritual leader since 2006. He was the founding coordinator for Greater Washington Interfaith Power and Light. He has also served as the associate director for the National Religious Partnership for the Environment and the director of congregational relations for the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. He is additionally the author of To Till and to Tend, a guide for Jewish environmental study and action. What a crew we have with us today. Todd, if you would get us started, that would be most welcome. Thank you.
Wow, what a lineup. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm very excited to be here. Meeting Reverend Malcom and other faith leaders in the climate arena just feels like a very real blessing, and it gives me a great hope in the face of overwhelming concern. I think it may well be that the power of faith combined with a passion for earth will ultimately be the magic mix that saves our sacred home. I've come to see this ultimately as a quest to save paradise from the love of money, to protect the spirit of Mother Earth from man's greed. And I feel this journey will ultimately reconnect humanity with nature, healing our souls through a reconnection with Source that we've lost in this materialistic world that leaves so many yearning for true love, a love of life, grounded in the miracle of life and the miracle of this planet and the great mystery of our connectedness to that spirit. I don't usually talk about this aspect of things because it's my personal journey, but I feel I could and should say some things today about this. So here we go. My personal journey in 2008, I went to Africa. And as a result, my relationship with Spirit became quite wonderful. And it was a blessing born of both suffering and healing. So as I said, I went to Africa for a year and ended up back in the closet as a gay man at the age of 44. It was terrifying, frankly, as I was threatened with arrest and lived for months in Ethiopia, worrying every day about my safety. And I later realized that I had experienced fear and anxiety like I had experienced as a child, but now as an adult. And it was frankly unbearable and unacceptable. So coming home, I dove into gay rights work, and through it, I had to heal from this new trauma, which had opened up a Pandora's box of childhood torment and unresolved anxiety and anger. And that is what social rejection and relentless bullying does to a child. And most of us bury it and move on, which I had done, but the impacts worsen over time, and going to Africa made me relive those. Thankfully, I found my way to the Naraya, which is a Native American ritual that has been shared to help heal the Two-Spirit community, the gay community. And in that ritual, I experienced spirit directly as a lived experience, finally. And I came eventually to realize that if spirits existed outside of us as our ancestors and angels, that I too was a spirit. And this has been a great blessing, obviously. Since then, the Great Spirit and I walk together, and I see and follow its guidance. In Native traditions, it's called the Great Mystery. And I believe this is of earth. And we are part of and come from this spirit. Spirit once told me that the earth is not here for us, we are here for the earth. And I liked that idea at the time, but I didn't think much of it until I came to see that this is the calling of our time, of my life, and our lives together, to protect her, our mother, our creator, and all her children, the trees and animals and water and air, from harm, to protect earth from harm. I keep thinking that one day this will mean protecting earth from a huge asteroid. Unfortunately for now, we are the asteroid. It is our pollution causing that same level of devastation. And so the test before us, as I see it, is to unite to save earth, to set aside ego and find common ground, to work as one. And in so doing, I believe we will find a deeper connection to spirit and to one another. So this is the challenge we face, and it's no easy task. Can humanity unite to stop 100 corporations from destroying paradise? Or will we continue to argue amongst ourselves about every imaginable detail until it's too late? And so for this, I feel we need a plan for unity. And this is where all of you come in and our project. And I'm going to share now my screen to do a quick presentation as we dive into the mundane from the sublime. Here we go. Let me move my pictures out of the way so I can see everything. Great. So we have a historic opportunity for major climate legislation in 2021, but a huge uphill battle still to climb. It was only in 2018 when we started some work that was mentioned in my bio that we pushed the idea of federal legislation, and no one was talking about federal legislation. And we brought this team together, and who knew that Sunrise and DSA were going to end up going to Pelosi's office, and AOC was going to show up, and the Green New Deal was going to explode into the scene. And that was sort of incubated in our little group. But you can't foresee always the magic that's going to happen when you bring parties together. And so that's wonderful. We're in this moment where we have that opportunity, even if we don't control the Senate. Even if we do control the Senate, rather, we have a huge uphill battle to convince a lot of people to make meaningful change. And so when I approach a movement organizing, there are two things that you need. And one is a demand, and the other is the plan. So in terms of the demand of Congress, you need a demand that inspires people to uncommon valor and to great action. And I believe that potential for that is here. I was in the immigration movement for a while, and when we were fighting that fight, there was a fast led by faith community on the Capitol lawn that went on for weeks. And the president and vice president came to pay their respects. I think the power for the earth, the passion for the earth, is exponential and vast. And if we had the right demand in play, that power would be brought to bear to push us through any obstacles, including Republican leadership. But the solutions have to be grounded in science, and we need policies that will actually reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. There are about 100 gigatons a year, I'm told. I don't know what a gigaton is, but I'm told it's a lot. And we need to reduce that to zero and then go negative within 15 years. So our thought is that we need to start looking at all the legislation proposed and making sure that it's going to have predicted measurements of reduction, and then ways to measure that and keep on track of that. Because we cannot do something in policy next year and pat ourselves on the back and then wait 15 years to see if it worked, because we will have lost our planet in the meantime. The other big prong of this is unity for real political power. And when I joined the climate movement in about 2016, 17, I started looking at it. I saw thousands of organizations, but I didn't see any national climate coalition like we had with Reform Immigration for America. And so I've come to learn by being deeply involved from the grassroots up, mostly grassroots work is where we are, that the biggest challenge we face is finding unity so we can work together and have real political power. So that's environmental groups, civil society writ large, scientists, lawyers, youth, and of course, faith. We must unite. Toward these goals, our team of volunteer experts spent a year collecting all the different information from the climate movement worlds and came up with 150 sources of expert reports and laws, and we digested that into 700 solutions in 11 sectors. And this is now the lay of the land, the full scope of what everyone thinks we should do to address the problem. It's a lot of material, but at least it's all in one place now. From that, we sifted out a climate bill package of 10 existing bills that have been filed in the last 6 months that tackle a lot of great things. Regenerative agriculture, fracking, ending those tax subsidies, banning plastics, refrigerants, factory animal farming, toxic pesticides, which is one of my favorites because we're going to save the bees and the butterflies, and planting billions of trees, restoring wetlands, environmental justice, just transition, and tons of jobs. These are all wonderful, but it's just a beginning, but it's used now as an organizing framework. So we have something specific we can organize around and start lobbying for. And so the plan with this is to adopt a district, get organizations to adopt their congressional district and to build many coalitions in all 435 districts so that we, those are the votes we need, right, ultimately. And then they will join to work on the Senate. And so far, we just started this in July, and we already have 66 districts in 20 states, and we're aiming to get to 435. And this network is the local leaders of 350 and Climate Reality, Sierra Club, Citizens Lobby, and you get the idea. These are the real veterans with real power, and we have an incredible faith team led by Lavona Groh, who's on our call today, and Corinna Gore, and Reverend Malcolm's now supporting it, and organizations all over the place. I'm going to speed up because we're almost out of time. The last piece I want to share with you is that we're having a Climate Convergence on December 9th and 10th. It's 2 full days. We've invited the executive directors of all the major coalitions and green groups and faith groups and you name it. And we've already got a beautiful list of folks who have agreed to come, including Reverend Malcom. And that question presented for this symposium is, what is our plan for 2021 and how are we going to work together? And we're going to close that 2 days of action with a climate cabaret featuring fabulous cabaret artists from New York and around the country. So that's it. We invite everyone to join us. Please adopt a district. I'll put a link in the chat. Study the 2020 bill package. Join our listserv for meetings. Register for the symposium, and everyone's welcome to co-host it. And please help us forge this network by communicating with everyone the urgent need for us to weave ourselves together. And so we can unite and save life on Earth as we've known it and loved it. And thank you very much for your attention.
All right. Thank you, Todd. And we'll now transition to Shantha.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. I just want to express to the United Church of Christ community how grateful Creation Justice Ministries is as your ecumenical partner for the amazing leadership coming out of the UCC on environmental justice and centering racial justice in our ecological policymaking. Now more than ever, we are entering into a time that requires courageous action and a call to justice that is full of self-aware and love-filled faith community leadership. And the United Church of Christ has been preparing you all for this through these webinar series, through the organizing initiatives, and thank you. We are also in a time of paradox because we have urgency to address the climate crisis, and we know that fast action that ignores the need for broad, deep coalitions that are durable is not actually going to solve the crisis before us. So we have been building racial justice alliances, and now we have to stand by those alliances and not give in to any forces of expediency for those who want to address the climate emergency with things that look like quick fixes that aren't going to actually solve our deeper issues. Many people on this Zoom have been doing environmental justice work for a long time at the local level, and I thank you for that work. I have been working on connecting faith communities with federal public policy change-making efforts for almost 10 years now, and I have to say I've never been more excited about this ministry than I am right now. I have accompanied faith communities and some of you personally through the good times like the Paris Agreement and really tough times like the past 3 years of the seemingly unending dismantling of bedrock environmental laws. And we have been through that together. And I've witnessed over the past 4 years of really difficult federal policy environment that there's been a lot of amazing progress on faith-rooted organizing and community alliance building for racial justice. I personally have also been through a huge growth process, and I know some of you have as well, as we've been through the dismantling of Bears Ears National Monument and the building of the Dakota Access Pipeline, after all the progress made with tribal leadership, that we, our call, particularly as an ecumenical Christian ministry, to counteract the deeply devastating and lasting impacts of colonialism is one that we need to stay focused on in this time. So the election result has shown us that our country is still very divided. We should prepare ourselves as we are gearing up for policy action, that we will need to be a force of love that is very durable, that will overcome white supremacist forces that are going to rear their heads in this time and are going to do so in an emboldened way because of what we have been living through over the past few years. So in the face of present suffering from the climate crisis, from white supremacy, as well as future threats, people of faith that you are in ministry with may be experiencing doubt in the power and possibility of God's presence in this time for the transformative action that we need. And people may also be looking at the scale of societal transformation that is required really to sustain life on Earth. And there may be a lot of fear about the unknown. And that fear has a possibility of impeding our change-making efforts. So as religious leaders who are in ministry of policy change making, we are entering this time with awareness of all of this context. And now more than ever, our self-awareness and our leadership with love and community is very crucial. So here are a few of the things that Creation Justice Ministries is focusing on and looking at as we approach this new season, new administration, new Congress. One is large-scale conservation protections. So there is an initiative called 30 by 30 to protect 30% of all of God's creation around the world by 2030. This initiative is coming out of the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, and the United States is not a party to that. But we are, we do have our own federal legislation for 30 by 30, which was introduced in this Congress and will be introduced in the next one again. And President-elect Biden has committed to doing a commitment on the national level to 30 by 30 through executive action. So 30 by 30 is a very significant goal that is going to require massive organizing. And here is where religious communities can be very, very important, not only in having political will for the scale of conservation, which worldwide scientists are saying is necessary to sustain life on Earth. Actually, we want to have more like 50% by 2050 or sooner. But we also need to look at how that conservation is being done. Is it being done in a just way? So are we looking at questions of who is getting access to the power of nature's healing presence? Who gets access to green space? How are we thoughtfully siting these conservation areas so that people are benefiting from the opportunity of having these Sabbath spaces? What involvement will have about the conservation of their own heritage in these places that are being conserved? These are very central questions that religious communities are going to be instrumental in raising. Another major policy area that Creation Justice Ministries is concerned about is climate resilience policy. And over the past year or so, we have been working with communities, particularly in the Southeast, to build relationships with resilience officers that are based in cities and that are based in states. In some cases, there's a state office of resilience. These alliances with resilience officers are going to be very important as we make the case at the federal level for a very strong commitment to coastal resilience, to wildfire resilience, to all of the other threats of the climate crisis. And so if you don't yet know if you have a resilience officer at the local level, please find out. And if you don't have one, now would be a good time to advocate to have one, because these resilience officers are really going to help us tell the story of what needs to happen for our communities to move through the climate crisis with the strength and the ability to bounce back that we're going to need to live through this together. We also are very much concerned about the restoration. So I started with the big picture issues, but we're very concerned about the restoration of much that we have lost in terms of bedrock environmental laws. But we don't want to get trapped there. We want to make sure that we restore what has been lost, and particularly what has been lost with decision-making processes. So one kind of wonky change that has been made in the past year was the dismantling of the National Environmental Policy Act, which is a bedrock environmental law that helps our communities participate in planning through environmental assessments about major environmental projects and infrastructure that's getting laid. And there are now more shortcuts that are available for major companies that weren't there before. And this is to environmental justice. So restoring NEPA is going to be a really important short-term goal for environmental justice. And in addition to that, just many of the regulations on methane pollution, which is a very dangerous and potent greenhouse gas. Restoring those quickly is going to be important. And we have heard that the Biden administration, the incoming Biden administration, is committed to that. We just can't get stuck in the restoration process. So that's just a little preview of a couple of the things that Creation Justice Ministries is thinking about. Maybe I'll pause there and we'll get more into it in the Q&A.
Terrific, Shantha. Thank you so much for that presentation, and we will we'll get back to you in Q&A. Well, up next, we'll have Rabbi Daniel Swartz.
Thanks so much, everybody. And Shantha, I don't know if you were able to see in the chat as you were speaking that you're talking about open spaces as Sabbath spaces, really resounded with a lot of people. And I just wanted to do a quick shout out to Evan Eisenberg, who wrote about with that terminology about 15 years ago or more in The Ecology of Eden. And what a great thought that is, and how great it is to hear that language used again. So I want to also share a little presentation to help us think about when we're doing this work, how do we do it? What is it that we do as people of faith when we're trying to engage with our national leaders? And what is distinctive about our role? How are we more than just the Sierra Club at prayer, as it's been said? So I want to take you first on a thought exercise. This is easier to do when we're all sitting in the same room because no one will be able to see your answer. But I want you to just close your eyes for a moment and think of the first picture, the first image comes to mind when you hear the word environment. Now, open your eyes and raise your hand if there were any people in that picture. And the problem is that when we think of environment, that somehow we often think of whales and wilderness, when environment is where we live. It's our home, as Todd spoke about, our sacred home. And this is where we live, pray, work, play. And if we don't understand that nearness, if the environment is something out there, we've already lost the battle. And when we take that in and we understand that we're a part of this whole, that's where we begin to speak faith language in a holistic sense. Part of what we have to do is to go beyond love thy neighbor. And I want to start with a text from Leviticus and point out a couple things about it and then how it guides us. So right after it talks about loving thy neighbor, the text goes a little further and says, the stranger who resides with you shall be to you as one of your citizens. You shall love him or her as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I, the Eternal, am your God. So this points out a number of things. First of all, stranger is a terrible translation because it makes us think of somebody who we don't know yet. But stranger would have been the immigrant or the refugee, somebody who lives among you and yet you treat as an other. And so anyone that we other or has been othered or is viewed as outside, that's the stranger. And in this political climate, it's really everyone we disagree with, in addition to all its other meanings. And the great sage, medieval sage Rashi points out a couple things about this. So the first is, when something bad happens to you, the idea isn't to then make other people pay for that, but to use that as an opportunity for understanding when something bad happens to someone else, and to broaden our hearts and minds, and to take the experience of the times that we have been made strangers and use that as fuel for us to welcome and to not make anyone else a stranger. In the end, I don't think that we can love our neighbors, can love the stranger without climate justice. How can we say that we love somebody when we're burning down their house? But just as important for us to remember in this climate, we can't be successful in our work for climate justice unless we love our neighbors and strangers, including those who have opposing views, trying to understand them as human beings. And this gets us to the second point that Rashi pointed out, which is that the last word in this is Elohechem, your God. And in English, it's not so clear, but in the Hebrew, that means your in the plural. In other words, your God and the God of the stranger, the God that is called a different name, the God that is worshipped differently. All of these are the same and are full of love. And to be able to understand that God includes everyone. When we speak as people of faith, we need to raise the fundamental justice questions behind climate change, such as on the top of the screen, the countries that are the highest emitters. On the bottom of the screen, what's red are the countries that are suffering the most already, and due to both societal and geological, geographic issues, will be suffering the most. And it's almost an exact inverse. So the people causing the problem are not the people who are suffering. And we see that on the macro scale of the world. We see that on micro scale in terms of fence line communities. And this idea of injustice is one of the things that we call out to as people of faith. And it's been part of what prophets have said from the beginning. Is it not enough for you to graze on choice grazing ground, but you must also trample with your feet what is left from your grazing? And is it not enough for you to drink clear water, but you must also muddy with your feet what is left? And must my flock graze on what your feet have trampled and drink what your feet have muddied? This is Ezekiel making it clear whose side God is on, not the wealthy, not the winners, but those who have been pushed out and who suffer. And that's where we need to be focused in our work, as Shantha has talked about in terms of racial justice and reconciliation and our mistreatment of indigenous communities. As people of faith, we also are taught to look ahead, to see the long term, and to see when that long-term path that we're on is wrong. And this gets me to something called the parapet principle, which is not a couple of cute pets, but parapet is that edge around buildings that you would see in most buildings in the Middle East, where it doesn't quite have the same climate as we do here in northeastern Pennsylvania, where I'm located, where you could hang out on the roof, where it was a place that you could wash and grow things and have dinner in the cool of the evening. And the idea is that you build a parapet because it is much better to keep somebody from falling than to try to pick them up after they're fallen. Proverbs teaches us the prudent see danger and take cover, while the simpleton keeps going and pays the penalty. So that's something that we can speak from. The Proverbs is not only something that Christians and Jews hold in common, but speaks from a wisdom tradition that transcends a particular religious viewpoint. And it really, I think, is alive way to help people see things. Another part of our language as faith people is the language of solidarity. And that takes me to a commentary on the book of Leviticus that said, some people were sitting in a ship. One of them took a drill and began to bore a hole in the ship under where he was sitting. His companion said, "What are you sitting and doing?" He said, "What is it to do with you? I am boring a hole under my part of the ship." They said, "But the water is coming in and sinking the ship under us." How do we get people out of the us, them? How do we get people out of thinking, here I am protected behind my little fenced off area, and understand how we are in solidarity with each other? That's a fundamental task of us as religious advocates. I think I'll skip this. And we need to be thinking about the future generations as well. What is it that we're doing today that our children and grandchildren and future generations will pay for? Indigenous wisdom around the world speaks of this. And we have these traditions within Abrahamic faiths as well. Within my tradition, we speak of the sage Honi, who was walking around and seeing an old man planting a carob tree, and he makes fun of the old man. He says, "How many years will it take for this to give forth its fruit?" And the man answered, 70 years. That's a small exaggeration. The Talmud sometimes deals in hyperbole. Honi asked, "Are you such a healthy man you expect to live that length of time and eat its fruit?" He was just thinking this is a ridiculous thing to do. And the man answered, "I found a fruitful world because my ancestors planted for it. And can I do at least as much for my children?" This again is something as people of faith that we need to regularly remind our elected officials about. In closing, two messages that we need to be bringing. One is that of hope. As Shantha said, we live in a time of fear. We live in a time of overwhelming problems, and our faith traditions have called to us again and again from the depths. It's hard to read the Psalms without seeing the depths of despair again and again in the Psalmic traditions. And yet in those traditions, we move consistently from that place of despair to a place of calling out, a place of connecting, and a place of lifting up. And we need to be able to bring that hope to those who have given up, to those who have fought this fight for so long that they're just exhausted and don't believe that uphill battle can be won. That is hope is faith in things unseen, and that is our vision. And the last is a reminder about the prophet Nathan. If we're talking about prophets, he did not go around naked in Jerusalem for 3 years like Isaiah. He went directly to the king, and he got the king to listen to him after David had sinned with Bathsheba. First of all, not by yelling at David, because most people don't like to be yelled at. I think that's something we can all take from the times that we have been made strangers. And yelling at somebody almost never accomplishes anything good. But he drew King David in by telling a story that made the situation feel real and relatable. And David was a part of the answer in the way that he told the story. And then Nathan showed him that he was also part of the problem, and asked for a clear change, the plan part that Todd has talked about. And that's something that we can all emulate. We come in out of love. We speak our truth that in a very personable story way that makes something real. And then we involve somebody in trying to help be part of the solution. And every time we do that, I think we have a greater chance of success. Doesn't mean we're going to succeed, but that at least gets us a chance of this success and this fight that is so critical for the future of our planet and generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. So I'd like to ask a question of the panel, and anyone can feel free to answer this. And I apologize that I'm not on video. We're getting ready to load, so I've got to get ready to move about. But the question is, being that we're as divided as we are, and it's been as prevalent as it has been, how would you say that we should be advocating on in legislative circles as faith community?
And the silence of the crowd was loud.
Right.
I don't feel like I can speak for that, so I have to leave the other folks to do that, I think. I have strategic ideas, but I don't know that they're specific to faith. I think the biggest issue is that we need all the leaders from all the groups with the established connections to rise up out of the silos and reach out to their peers and say, how are we going to unite in common cause despite our differences? To me, this is the most critical strategic imperative, and it's a moral imperative as well. It's easy to stand alone and do what we feel comfortable doing. It is much, much harder. In fact, it's almost unbearable to work together. And that's what I see when I look at the movement and the relative political power between the fossil fuel industry and the rest of us. 100 corporations control everything. We've been fighting these fights for decades in silos. And I was shocked when I joined the climate movement that there's not a national climate coalition that has as its mandate unity around a specific piece of comprehensive climate legislation and a plan to mobilize the millions of people who are ready to do this. I've never seen a movement with the capacity and potential that this one has, the reach, the breadth of interest. And so that's why we're holding the symposium. I listed 15 of the speakers, and you can see what we're going for there. We're trying to bring these people together and say, what is the plan and how do we work together? So I would just call everyone to that mission. The individual policy goals are nice. We don't have the power to pass them by ourselves. And we, I believe, could push comprehensive climate legislation through the Senate no matter who was in charge if we united in common cause. And that's the hard part, figuring out what that content needs to be. There are people working on it. There are going to be proposals coming. They're going to be coming from the socialist community, and they're going to come from the DNC. And I feel like these are fire trucks rushing to the fire, and they're about to crash into each other. Instead of us really working it out in advance, how can we? And there's only a few big issues that keep people divided, but boy, do they keep them divided. And if I hear the word theory of change one more time, my head's going to explode. I'm young, I'm older. We didn't talk like that back then. The theory of change is unity and a common demand. That's really all it is. So anyway, I'll stop. Thank you.
I just want to add to, in addition to socialists and the DNC, like there are a lot of Republicans that do care about climate action, and actually religious communities have been instrumental in cultivating some moral and political courage among some members of Congress to be out about that. And I think that that actually may become much more visible in the emerging political environment than it has been in the past few years, since we did not have someone friendly in the White House to the climate causes that we were working on cultivating. So I think, especially if, I would say no matter what, religious communities are going to have a strong mandate to uphold principles of justice and love, and make sure that expediency does not railroad those values. But particularly if the Senate stays red, religious communities are going to be playing a pivotal role in holding together unity around values and cause that may otherwise, get undermined by partisanship. And I would add that as we look at the unique role of faith communities, sometimes faith leaders say, well, what is the difference that we're really making when we go to Congress? And just to build on some of Rabbi Daniel's comments, think about all of the other groups that are approaching Congress with asks around ecological justice issues. There are industry interests, and then there are issue groups that are mandated to go in and focus on one particular issue. Religious communities are very unique in that we are inherently intersectional. we come with the concerns of our communities, and we are able to hold in mind the whole of the needs for economic justice and the needs for racial justice, along with health justice and immigration issues and refugee issues, and our very strong stake in the disaster relief space. And we bring all of that to our faith witness on this set of issues. And I can't think of another constituent group really like that brings that kind of intersectionality. So I can't overstate enough the pivotal role that I believe faith communities are set to play in the new political environment that's emerging.
You know, Shantha, I think you said something extremely important that I want to lift out, and that was that, excuse me, it's not just Democrats and DNC, but also there are Republicans that also are for the climate and for protection of people. And in my beginning, I talked about protections and taking it out of the language of regulation, and talked about protecting people and planet. I think if we couch it in that language, we can find a whole lot more people that would advocate with us if we couched it in language of protecting people and planet versus regulation. Regulations cuts off money. Protecting people and planet means that you have a moral obligation. I've got to run because my plane is now boarding. Peace and see y'all later, and good luck and all kind of love and stuff.
Safe journeys.
Thank you. I just want to add that on the Republican side, I'm a firm believer that we are going to have huge Republican support. The climate crisis is devastating lands all over the country without regard to party. Everyone's suffering miserably. We work with a lot of farm associations. They are deep in the rural communities. So I agree. I think there's great hope there. But for us to figure out what that is, we need to figure out what our own demands are or what the solutions of demands are and agree upon that among the willing, and then see who we add on and not start with compromise and water that down and end up with what we get, because we do have a real timeline that we're up against, and there is science to this equation. Somebody asked a question in the thing about why climate crisis policy could be a coalition under which folks should work. And I'll just say that we're not looking to be that entity. We are providing we're leading by example by providing this open and inclusive organizing space that is all grassroots driven. And, you know, we don't have any horses in this race except the planet. And although a lot of individuals have different passions, we're coming together on that broader mission. And so all our meetings are open and welcome to everyone. But what my real hope is that the leaders of this community are going to come together and form a federation or a superstructure of some kind that has a public-facing plan and way for people to engage. Because right now it's still all being run by like an inside secret. And I've been on the inside for many years. I was legislative, I've done all of those different places. And the inside strategy has failed to save the planet. And it doesn't matter how many legislative aides, phone numbers we have individually that we can get on the phone, or what kind of personal relationships we have. It only matters what we come up with together and ask for together, because that will be when our collective voice is more powerful than the entrenched opposition, which still controls the day. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. You know, that relates to one of the other questions we have here, which is, you know, there's organizations such as Green Faith and Interfaith Power and Light, and that are going to be unrolling, and you know, programs and efforts. And how do you bring unity when you've got organizations with all these different programs, and we can all be pulled into different directions with our time and energy? Where does unity come? You know, how does that bring us all together when we've currently each have our own very well thought out and really good programs, but yet we're operating separately?
And the impetus for that comes from, you just have to look at the results. Like, how many decades have we been fighting for the same incremental change and not getting even that? So it becomes a strategic imperative So, start thinking about, do you really want to accomplish something, and how many more bodies do you need to get there? And all these issues interlock. So it's not as if they're tangents that we're trying to unite. And that's what the digest does. It shows all the issues across all the sectors and all the groups that care about different things, so we can start to see the commonality of what we all agree on. But it's no easy task, and it's going to require leadership from the top. And we're bringing everyone to the symposium. Who are we, right? We're nobody really, and these kinds of things. But the right people are coming, and I don't know what will happen, but maybe they'll feel the motion and the power and the passion and say, yeah, maybe we can. I wish the executive directors of the major Greens were in emergency session once a week, every week, working together, saying, how do we pull our resources? Just think what would happen if even 10 of them came up with the adopted district plan and decided, okay, we're going to break up the districts around the country, and your group's going to take this one. There's only 435 of them, and there are thousands of climate organizations. If that leadership came from the top, it would be game on.
I appreciate that. Looking at the clock, we always end with a call to action, and to kind of segue into that call to action and to get each of your thoughts on that, I just kind of want to put this out there to stimulate your thinking. Recently I had an inspiring group out of the state of Washington where during this election cycle, and still in this election cycle, they were meeting online every week to do text banking to turn out environmental voters. And there are people from all over the country that were doing that. And so I guess my question is, as we move past the Georgia election and into 2021, are there ways that people can organize as faith communities, maybe online, to do something where they're doing advocacy every week directed to Congress? Is there something they could be doing every week? Whether it's getting together online to do emails to members of Congress, or doing letters to the editor? Is there something there that people, just anybody who's got a passion can get in there and get plugged in? Are there thoughts there?
There's many different levels that you can do that at. I think the first thing is you're right. Don't do it by yourself. Part of the reason to do this in groups is because it's more effective, and part of it is because it's less exhausting. When you have that social network that helps you. So your congregation may have a social justice team. Help them to get involved in climate action, and to meet regularly, and to invite other people from your town in. On a state level, there are Interfaith Power and Light chapters in most states now, and many of them focus on state level legislation. And states can be a place where they can be ahead of the country, or places where you're fighting other rearguard actions because they're just being awful. But it's important, even though when we have new federal options, not to forget about the states. And then look at your denomination. If you belong to a denominational group, if there's ecumenical groups like Shantha's, there's interfaith groups like National Religious Partnership and Green Faith and Interfaith Power and Light. I do think that even if we're proclaiming the same solutions, that there is a real value in faith, in the faith community, speaking as a faith community and not just as another member of the Citizens Climate Lobby or the Sierra Club or wherever. I think we really do come from a different place and have a different language and help people see things in a different light.
I'm going to shape my answer also in response to another question that I saw in the Q&A box about what to do when your church doesn't necessarily see the justice agenda as part of church. So in addition to participating in the monthly action center, which Creation Justice Ministries rolls out a fresh one at the beginning of every month, and we have a bulletin insert, and we have care for creation tips for little actions individuals can do, and then we have a policy action once a month that we feature. In addition to doing that, at the local level, my advice is please root it in story. Learn your local community's stories and break open the hearts of those who have hardened them to the need for systemic change. That those relationships that you build in your local community about those who are individually affected through asthma or cancer or flooding or wildfire, those are the stories that are going to transform hearts and minds. And that story work is critical and can only be done at the local level. And actually, like when you do it in an organized way, so if you're in a place where people are not ready to go meet with their members of Congress yet, if you do it in an organized way and really do a listening campaign or some sort of a witness moment at church where someone shares their story of faith and it connects somehow to the climate crisis, you're going to find that people will feel compelled to act one way or another. I hope that's true. I've heard people have found that to be true when they do it.
Thanks. Todd, any final thoughts? Anything you want to say about adopt a district, or how does that even work to adopt a district?
Adopt a district. So you can adopt your own congressional district individually or a local group. We have a whole team that will support you through it. And then the idea is that you will build connections to many coalitions in your congressional district on this set of 10 bills now, which covers farming, covers a whole set of areas. You'll see the interlinking ways. So you can bring your cousin who cares about the bees and the person who wants to get rid of the factory farms, and you can start to call them together. And not just individuals, but obviously groups that care about that within your community. And so I put the Adopters District link in there before we go. I'll try to do it again, but it's on our website. And we'll coach you through it. And we have a fabulous team of people all over the country willing to help you. And they'll teach you how to lobby and that sort of thing as well. And you'll be part of a national network that is really inspiring me, because these are the local, passionate leaders. And now we're part of a collective. It's a community too, really. It feels lovely. And so join us, welcome. And it's just a prototype really of what we need to do at a much bigger scale, but it's already working and it's fun, and it's causing all those groups at their local level to talk to their leaders. And so we're trying to forge unity from the bottom up.
Thank you so much for those thoughts, and thank you to all of our panelists for joining today. I would say out of all the webinars we've been doing over the past couple of years, this is really one of the best for giving us lots of ideas to stimulate real concrete actions moving forward. And I really feel like this is a critical moment for us. Part of the root of the word prophet is one who is called. And I really feel like this is a calling for our time right now. And it's becoming very defined in its focus. Compelling Congress to act right now is just so important for us and how we live out our calling, I believe. And so thank you to everyone for joining, and thank you to our panelists for such a rich, stimulating conversation. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
We'll be back next month with another webinar.
All right.
Stay tuned for more.
Wonderful. Thank you all.